guess what? Ben Shapiro of Daily Wire fame, a guy who knows a thing or two about how silly it is to be just constantly woke. So much so that he's given Disney a run for its money with a new Snow White. I wonder if that's why Disney pulled it. You know, they were going to have a live Snow White edition complete with Rachel Zegler from West Side Story, who kind of hates Snow White and the whole story of Snow White. And she's told us that over and over again. I think Gal Gadot was going to be the evil stepmother, the queen. Well, they spent like a reported $350 million on this thing, and then they pulled it. But guess what? Ben has his own Snow White, the like non-woke Snow White that he's working on with Brett Cooper, who is amazing. Just this really fun young woman who used to be a Disney actress. You know, I should ask her about what life was like, given the Nickelodeon thing that just came out, given the Diddy stuff we're watching. Anyway, Candace Owens was recently fired from Daily Wire. I like Candace a lot. I don't agree with her on everything. And I don't agree with her support of Gaza and Palestine. And I imagine Ben Shapiro doesn't either. And this may have become a sticking point. We've talked about this before. Well, Ben Shapiro is weighing in on this for the very first time. He just broke his silence. He appeared on my friend Dave Rubin's show. Dave's been on this show. Dave is a big, prominent YouTuber, and as is Ben. And they sat down and they talked about literally the elephant in the room. I think that Dave brought it up that way. Let's take a listen.
All right, so let's do the elephant in the room for just a moment, because I saw you this week on Piers Morgan. He asked you repeatedly about Candace. You repeatedly basically said,
I won't talk about that. I'll say that here too.
Yeah, and that's fine. And, you know, it's interesting because we all sort of came up together to different extents, and we've all done a million things together in public events and networks and all of those things. It seems to me that at this moment, she's now a free agent. She happened to end up on Locals, which I created, and we're a platform, not a publisher that you guys are. Can you at least talk to just sort of where it's at now? She's not with you. She's free.
She's free to do whatever she wants to do, to be wherever she wants to be. And the difference between a publisher like the Daily Wire and a platform like Locals is obviously that a platform should have a very broad range of speech that it allows, including speech that maybe even the creators don't believe is inside what they would consider to be the Overton window. It's a very different thing than direct subsidization of particular opinions. So the Daily Wire would not have a host, would not pay a host who was staunchly pro-abortion. Mm-hmm. They would have no obligation to pay a host who is staunchly pro-abortion. And so when it comes to the hosts on the Daily Wire, obviously everyone is able to say what they want. Nobody ever comes to me and says, you can't say X. Nobody ever says that to Walsh, and no one ever said that to Candace. But the reality is that there is an Overton window at the Daily Wire. Obviously, there was a non-meeting of the minds. That's pretty much all I can say on this. And, you know, a lot of this has happened publicly. But to the extent that the Daily Wire is in fact not a publisher, it is that is in fact not a platform, it is a publisher. That means that there is no moral obligation for the Daily, and there's no free speech problem with the Daily Wire saying we don't wish to pay a particular host, or that host saying I don't wish to work here anymore, because again, there's a parting of the ways that is not really open for discussion at this point.
Does it surprise you that so many people, even on our side of this, are confused about that as it relates to free speech and quote unquote cancel culture? Like severing a business tie, as long as you're not throwing someone in jail, they're able to be everywhere else, is not.
I'm not super surprised at the controversy, honestly, because to a certain extent, I think that there's been a reaction on the right to the excesses of the left. So because what the left did is they said that the Overton window ought to be closed so tight that no one can get inside the Overton window. Basically, if you're to the right of Hillary Clinton, you can't be allowed inside the Overton window.
World,
yes, exactly. and not just with regard to platforms, but with regard to publishers. So, for example, this week, NBC News deciding that Ronna McDaniel was too much for them. Ronna McDaniel can't work at NBC News. The sacred halls of NBC News must not be sullied by the former head of the RNC. Jen Psaki, however, can have a show on MSNBC despite being the press secretary for the White House 5 seconds ago. Right? The right's response to that is, I think, correct to say you guys have shut the Overton window too tight. But I think some elements of the right have basically said there is no Overton window. The Overton window should be completely exploded with regard not just to platforms, with which I kind of agree, but with regard to publishers. So NBC News not only has an obligation to hire Ronna McDaniel, NBC News has the obligation to hire Alex Jones, for example.
Right, which just makes no sense at a business level, beyond free speech. I mean, there's a reason that networks exist.
Right, they have
series.
editorial positions.
Yeah.
Daily Wire has a very strong editorial position on a wide variety of issues. And by the way, I should say that there are a lot of people who are suggesting this is about disagreements over Israel. I mean, I can safely say it is not about disagreements over Israel, to the extent that, without reference to Candace at all here, Matt Walsh has taken the position that America ought not be involved in the Middle East at all. Matt Walsh's position, so far as I understand it, and I've talked to him about it, is that Israel, in a conflict between Israel and Hamas, Israel is obviously a more moral party than the genocidal terrorist group Hamas, but also it's very far away. He doesn't care, and it doesn't involve America. That's just a pure isolationist position. I disagree with it. I think it's wrong. I think that it's short-sighted. But again, he's on our platform. That is well within the range of acceptable discourse at the Daily Wire. So the notion that you have to mirror my exact perspectives on what Israel is doing in Gaza is obviously not true, based on the roster of hosts that we currently have. There are a lot of other factors, obviously, at play.
Right. So actually, let's connect that to something else going on that we did.
Okay. So it sounds to me like there might have been some other stuff going on. I don't know. But maybe there were some other reasons associated, because Ben Shapiro just said, look, there can be certain gradations. He doesn't think that it's a publisher's responsibility to have everybody on. That's a little bit different. And maybe something like Locals, which is not really a publisher, but just is a mechanism, like YouTube is a mechanism or Facebook is a mechanism to have the content. When you're an actual publisher, there are different responsibilities, et cetera. It's one of these issues that keeps coming up, because the thinking is, and by the way, Candace is over at Locals. I'm over at Locals as well. You can subscribe to me and follow me there on Locals. It's another platform where all of this content is carried, and they'll take everything. I mean, so long as it's not Diddy material, okay? They'll pretty much take it. And so their view on things is we're not here to stifle you or muffle you in any way. But when you're the publisher itself, it becomes a little bit different. And hey, there's business interests that may come into play, certain sponsorships, I don't know, that come into play. And the networks have the same sort of thing. I mean, it's what I like, ladies and gentlemen, about the autonomy of doing what I do. Because I have somebody that sells the show, a media company that sells the show, but this is me. I own this. This is my platform. It's carried on these various conduits, whether it be YouTube, yay for streaming, yay for the success we've seen on this YouTube platform. Please make sure you subscribe, tell all your friends. It's carried on Facebook, it's carried live on Rumble. And the idea here is, you know what? I can say whatever I want. I'm a pretty tame person, though. I get in trouble more than you'd think. I've never been able to figure that out. I say something and I get a whole country mad at me. Multiple countries. I can name them. Actually, I don't want to, because I don't want to start anything again. But I can get countries mad at me, and I'm I don't get it, because somebody else says something and they might even have a bigger platform and nobody cares as much. Apparently my words carry some weight, but I'm careful in what I say. I may joke around now and then, and if you take that out of context, it could lead you to something, but I also stand by what I've said. And one of the issues that apparently was a big enough issue to land me in enough trouble at my former employer, that would be Fox News, was when I spoke out about how insane it was to shut the whole country down and allow the CNNs of the world to get everybody in sort of a hysterical state. Not saying that, look, and I have loved ones that I lost as a result of that difficult time, but let's be fair and let's be honest. And you needed a strong economy to fight that thing. And you didn't and shouldn't have actually cut off your nose to spite your face in that one. You should have saved the people that needed the saving. In Florida, Ron DeSantis was smart. He actually had a rule: if you're over 65, he didn't want you out and about. You weren't supposed to even go to the grocery store. You needed to get your groceries delivered. You were supposed to stay in because you know what? You were vulnerable, but everybody else, they could go on with their lives. And so in Florida, those kids were back to school before anyone. And people were out and about. I was at a hotel recently. I was just down in Miami. You guys know that. I posted some pictures from the beach if you want to check out my Instagram account. Just one or two. I might have posted one here too. Anyway, I I was down in Florida, and it was amazing to me. I was talking to one of the proprietors at the hotel, and who told me, hey, you know what? We were closed for a few weeks, and that was it. And then we were open, and it was thriving. I was recently in Orlando, where a woman told me she had moved from New York City, from Brooklyn. She used to be a waitress at BLT. It's a sort of chain restaurant, upscale place. And she moved to Florida, and she got a waitressing job there. And she said, it's amazing. Like, the business was insane. And she was making more money than she'd ever made in her life. And she said, I can actually afford to buy a house now. So she bought a little condo, and she was so proud of this. And she said, my lifestyle is amazing compared to what I was dealing with living in Brooklyn and New York City, where, by the way, you get hit with a whole slew of taxes on top of it, and you live in some cramped little place. And she said, this is just amazing. So in other words, there were places and people that got it right. But yeah, I speak out. I speak out a lot. And perhaps my quote unquote publisher was not okay with it because the media went nuts. And so the next thing you know, they pulled a Tucker on me. And I don't know what went down with Candace, but it's classy of Ben to not share too many details. She's being classy about it too, and that she's not sharing too many details. And I'm going to tell you this, she's going to be perfectly fine. Again, I don't agree with her on everything, and she may not be my cup of tea on stuff, but hey, there's a place for that. There's an audience for it. And if you're talented enough, you will be successful, because that's the new kind of world in which we live. And we need to remember that. Look, there's some things that are really important right now. Our freedom of speech is important. Our borders important. Our economy is important. Our standing in the world is important. You know who knows about this? I'm going to give another plug here for my really good friends at Americans for Prosperity. I was actually just talking to these guys, AFP.org this morning. You can go to americansforprosperity.org. And we were talking about all these big issues, but primarily this whole Bidenomics thing and what a sham it's been, and how amazing it is that Biden still doesn't get it. Like, he actually thinks that he can run on Bidenomics, and he's got to have Obama in his ear saying, hey, Bud, like, it's not really flying. It's not flying because guess what? The price of everything has gone up. Every single thing has gone up. The only thing that maybe has gone down is if you buy your clothes from China. Really. Like, that's it. Like, everything else has gone up. Everything you can think of, and some more than others. I mean, the cost of eggs is through the roof. The cost of meat is through the roof. But the left is okay with that because you know what? You're not supposed to eat meat anyway. It's bad for the environment. And then, of course, the cost of mortgages. People are spending 66% more on mortgages. And it's amazing. In Bidenomics, Joe Biden wants to actually blame the retailers and say, hey, it's their fault. Walmart is just trying to price gouge you. Actually, that's not the case, because I went through with Rob, my friend over at 76, and we looked at the margins that these retailers are making. They're making less in terms of margins, much, much, much less. And so the reality of what's going on is that they're just trying desperately to keep up with the pace of inflation. Wages aren't growing as much as inflation is. So again, americansforprosperity.org, they care about this stuff. They're committed to it, and they know that we got to win the House and we got to win the Senate if we're going to get serious about reforming our economy, about making it easier for people to access cheap energy, about making it real that we actually have a border and we can protect who is in this country. So do check them out. This is an important time and important stuff.